On the day of November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was assassinated by former U.S. Marine Lee Harvey Oswald. He was killed in his motor cab through Deli Plaza in downtown Dallas, Texas. Here I have my grandfather, who was alive during that event. He was, where were you at the time of the assassination?
At the time I was a sophomore in high school, in class, in my English class.
What was the public's view of Mr. Kennedy before the shooting happened?
Prior to the shooting, he was kind of a hero of sorts. I mean, he was a hero from his experience in the Navy on the PT boats. And people liked him because he was somewhat rational and not really kind of a middle-of-the-road type of a Democrat. So he was well liked. He cut taxes. He did a lot of things that the people liked. And he had a firm grip on the situation that they had in the Cuban crisis. He did very well with that. So people liked him for having a stiff backbone.
There was many things he did for the country that were very well, including he made nuclear deals. Is that correct? Not nuclear deals, but he made the...
Well, he avoided the nuclear crisis in Cuba.
Yes, he...
And after that, they made the Cubans and the Russians move out of Cuba. The Russians had to move out of Cuba. They had intercontinental ballistic missiles that they had stationed there.
He was good with trading too, right? He traded with many other countries.
Traded with many other countries, had an open dialogue with, a lot of the other people, a lot of the other countries. And he was kind of well liked. He was an athlete, a bit of a romanticizer as well, that people kind of didn't bring out too much. But he was a good guy.
How is America doing at this time period? Were we kind of in the background of world politics and world situations like war, or were we kind of at the forefront?
We were at I wouldn't say the midway point, but hadn't come to pretty much of a head yet. The Cold War.
We were definitely not isolated, though, right?
No, we weren't isolated.
World politics.
No, the Cold War was starting up in the 50s with the communists, the Russians, whatever you want to call it. They formed the USSR, took over a lot of the Baltic countries, Eastern Europe, and basically, for what it was worth, enslaved the people, turned communism into a de facto government there. People really had no choice. They split Germany in half. Germany, East Germany, West Germany, prior to his taking over, and they were dealing with the USSR as they were, the Soviet Union.
Where were you at the time of John F. Kennedy's shooting? You were in middle school, right?
I was in a sophomore in high school.
Sophomore in high school.
I grew up in Paramus, New Jersey, small town just over, not too far from the George Washington Bridge. It was, it was a good time for New Jersey back then.
How did this affect you after he was killed? You personally, what kind of effect did this have on you?
Me personally, in terms of just being in high school, as we started to get older in high school and became seniors, the Vietnam War had been growing, and that was after Kennedy's death. Johnson pushed that quite a bit.
Want to give us a quick background on Vietnam War and kind of how John F. Kennedy was, how it was moving into it when he was in office at the time?
Well, my understanding was that Kennedy was backing up the Vietnamese government from having the communists take over southern Vietnam. And after Kennedy was killed, Johnson took over, and he was more of a hawk. But unfortunately, he made it into a political war, which we lost 50,000 Americans over there, both men and women. And the rules of engagement were just, way over the top. I mean, we used to fly over ships delivering ammunition and everything else in Haiphong Harbor and go bomb the jungle someplace instead of, taking care of the ships that were delivering and supporting the North Vietnamese. It was just, the politicians should be ashamed of themselves that were in back then.
If John F. Kennedy was alive and never got assassinated, how do you think the Vietnamese War would have kind of been changed? Like,
Well,
how would it affect
he wasn't quite as hawkish.
results?
I think that he might have supported the GIs that were there better than the politicians that were running the country under Johnson at the time. I don't see him doing some of the awful things that the politicians let them get away with.
How was the country affected? We went over how you were personally affected. Now, how was the country kind of? I know you kind of touched on that a little bit, but how was the country kind of more affected by him dying? Obviously, it's the president that was assassinated, so obviously that's a big deal.
There was
anyways,
there was wailing in the streets. I mean, the people were, they didn't know what was going to happen, who was going to be taking charge. It was just a total. People were just upset. They wanted somebody to pay for it, and obviously they got some satisfaction. But the details of all the investigation that went on for many years, they've never really come to a real settlement as to how Oswald ended up really shooting him, if he even did. But the country itself was growing. We were still in a very much of an industrial age, and this was before the advent of all the electronics and computer stuff that we have today that we use in terms of war to annihilate our enemies and stuff. But, it was an industrial age. The car companies were growing like in leaps and bounds. We had some really nice cars back in the 50s and 60s. And, the world kept going. It didn't matter what was going on in Vietnam. That was a political war. And it was, the political war was based on industrialization. The more they used in ammunition and machines and whatever else they used over there, our country, supported it. And of course, the industrial companies here kept building tanks and trucks and jeeps and whatever else they needed to support the war.
Yeah. Were there new rules created after, or new laws that kind of protected our president a little better, more like security laws and stuff like that, or kind of just stayed the same? Just like, do you remember any laws back then?
I don't remember any specific laws that they made, but the use of the Secret Service obviously changed dramatically their protection of the president and what they let him do. Kennedy was riding around in an open top vehicle.
Yeah.
It was a convertible, Lincoln Continental convertible. Now they travel in these, basically they look like Suburbans, but they're just these huge behemoth vehicles that are armored to the teeth. That between the Suburbans and these massive Cadillac limousines that have, there's armor inside of them that the John Q. public cannot purchase. And you have to have a special permit to build armored vehicles.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you for your time.
It's great working with you, Ty.
Thank you.
Congratulations.